Chapter 3. The minister droned in the background. The graveyard had changed from the night a week previous. Instead of the darkness, a muted light from the sun, covered by passing clouds, shone. Heavy drops of dew and leftover rain clung to the branches, bringing them down. Vespa frowned at the closed oak casket. Inside her was only numbness. Her mom stood beside, silent. Vespa didn't care about the cold, or the rain, or what anyone was saying. Instead, everything about her felt trapped inside the wood box in front of her. A smattering of family and neighbors attended the funeral, at least those who did not find the lost time too inconvenient to their schedules. Her father was liked, although not popular. He had been gone to too many conventions, out of town on business, or simply away for many close connections. One by one the guests drifted away while she stood with mud seeping into her shoes. Vespa hardly noticed the people leave. Most said something to her and her mom, but Vespa couldn't hear the words. The sound of her heartbeat and blood rushing in her ears was all she noticed. One of the last to leave was her dad's boss, a tall man in a dark suit. His somber face was one of the few attendees Vespa was certain showed true emotion, but she was uncertain whether the expression on his face was true sorrow or contempt. A spark of anger ignited in her chest. Why should this man show contempt? He was the one responsible for piling the workload on her father so much Vespa had to fight for his attention. Two emotions battled for control, apathy and irritation. "I'm sorry for your loss," the man said to Vespa's mother. "Stephen was one of our best employees. He always put 100% into the job. Few were as loyal as he." Her mother mumbled an inaudible reply. A morning drizzle splashed drops on her father's casket and roses, hiding her tears. The short grass sparkled. A stack of dirt piled to the side slowly changed a deeper hue of brown from the seeping rain and made mud. Water again began to flow beneath the graveside canopy where Vespa and her mother sat, alone. Vespa noticed precipitation repelling from her dad's employer's suit pants. His polished black boots reflected her red-rimmed eyes. "Your father spoke of you often, Vespa," said the boss. Vespa's memory dredged up his name. "Mr. Wright." His wrinkled hands rested lightly on her shoulder. She thought to brush his hand away, but lethargy won. Instead, she stood like a statue, unmoving and uncaring. Then the thought came to her. Mr. Wright knew her father's secrets. "My father went to a convention a week before he died." "What convention was he at?" Vespa asked. Mr. Wright hesitated and tilted his head to the side. Her lips tightened. Was he waiting? Stalling? A convention detailing minimum design standards for hydraulic structures. "Where was the convention held?" asked Vespa, keeping her expression innocent. Dark thoughts bounced around in her mind, and she knew she had to stop thinking this way. Her dad's boss was not responsible for her father's death. No one held a gun to her father's head and forced him to work long hours either. "You're not thinking of going there, are you?" Clever, thought Vespa. He covered his hesitation with a question. She remained silent, uninterested in what he thought. He had already given himself away. His reluctance in answering was all she needed, and she felt worse. She wanted answers, but her father wouldn't have wanted her to pry when it no longer mattered. But she decided, to her, knowing what her father was doing did matter. Maybe he would have wanted to keep his secret to the grave, but that couldn't stop her. All his co-workers attended the funeral, so now would be a good time to start finding the truth. "It was Boston," said Mr. Wright. "I was devastated to hear of that bear attack. Just one of those freak happenstances. Everyone was surprised." "Yes, the attack caught everyone by surprise," said Vespa, looking up into the man's eyes. He stood expressionless and reached down, giving her a quick hug. She watched as he climbed a grassy knoll and entered a dark sedan. As the car pulled away down the gravel road, it was the first time Vespa saw the figure. He stood in the distance, behind where the car had parked, underneath several low branches of a weeping willow. A long dark trench coat, fastened from his ankles to chin, and his collar raised, obscuring most of his face. Despite the overhead rain clouds, he wore large dark sunglasses and a round black hat. Vespa could see the paleness of his face from where she sat. The man turned slightly, his face redirected to hers, and as if he just noticed the attention, walked further into the branches of the trees until he was no longer visible. Vespa gave an involuntary shiver. Something about the way he stared made her feel uncomfortable. Who stands around staring at people at a cemetery? But, she realized, they were obvious with the casket and canopy. The person was probably curious. The sprinkle continued while Vespa and her mom sat beside each other, letting the dank smell of dirt flood the air. Neither spoke. Vespa rubbed her fingers against the scratchy fabric of her black dress. Her mother sobbed gently until she ran out of tears. They arrived home, and Vespa heard one of her cousins laughing as they approached the door. There was a small squeak from the hinges as the screen opened. Flowers carrying little handwritten cards filled the house. Smells from the petals mingled with the musk of people. Her Aunt Grace was in the front room, excitedly in conversation with one of her dad's work associates, also in a dark suit. The pudgy rolls of her aunt blocked any hope the man had of being able to sneak away unnoticed, because inching around her bulk would take years. "You should try more of a navy blue tie," Grace spouted loudly above the other noise in the room. Her son, Luke, sat in the corner with earphones that looked like they belonged to an aviator. Hip-hop music blasted loud enough for everyone in the room to listen. He had already changed and was now in the full regalia of his favorite football team. Vespa scanned the room for any signs of the last child, Meg. In one of the dark corners of the room, near a fake potted plant, Meg stood with another handsome dark suit employee. She talked rapidly, leaning further towards the man. Meg was the same age as Vespa, 15, and that was where the similarities ended. At least Vespa could see little else they shared. The triple threat was what her father called them at one point. Her cousins and aunt didn't mean to be self-centered and oblivious to those around them. They just never thought about it. Who has time to think about others, when thinking about oneself takes so long? Mostly Vespa did not have to avoid them. The family lived west, in a tiny town on the Oregon coast. Here in Washington, D.C., they almost never visited. This arrangement was just fine with her. Vespa's father taught her survival skills. She could find water, build a shelter, and avoid relatives when she wanted space alone. She slipped quietly from the room before the vacuum of her aunt's mouth sucked her mother into the conversation. Avoiding her relatives was going well. That was one positive thing for the day. Some people liked to talk for hours when they had a problem. Not Vespa. She preferred to be alone and sulk. Her father was the only person who could show up and pull her out of a dark mood. If she could have her way, she would have told everyone to get the hell off her property. But her mom needed support. Her father was also the shoulder Vespa's mom had used to cry on. Vespa thought how lost her mom must feel. The hallway was short, with pictures of her family lined in an even row. Vespa grabbed a photo from the wall and proceeded down the small corridor to her room. She hesitated at her doorway. Scattered across her twin bed, on the side, and her computer desk in the corner were piles of clothes. Tall pants sat in a heap near the entrance. A tie hung limp from a bedside lamp. Luke had changed in her room, throwing his clothes carelessly around. She moved to her bed and pushed a button-up shirt to the floor. Kicking off her shoes, she leaned back to look at the ceiling, and decided what she would do next. How would she learn anything about her father's employers while they stood quietly in corners, berated by her cousins? She lay for a minute, then got back up, gathered Luke's clothes, and threw them out the window to the lawn. She immediately felt a little better. The first smile of the day spread across her face. Her father had been a good dad. He was often reckless, had loads of swagger, was unpredictable, and tremendously enjoyable. Vespa wondered if it was because her mother always pictured him as a handsome rogue he had got away with so many things. Of course, it was also possible her mother just ignored or did not see what was really going on. Either way, he took Vespa to do things like rock climbing at Death's Cliff. At least that is what he called it. Dirt biking complete with ramps, and the graveyard run. The graveyard run began one evening when Vespa was trying to use her powers of deduction to figure out where her father went every day. The bruises, scratches, and faraway looks he sometimes had all added up that maybe civil engineering was not all he did. She had her suspicions, of course, but he always kept a thin smile and only answered, "Perhaps," to her questions. He woke her one night at 2 a.m. with quick spurts of flashlight Morse code, a skill he'd taught her when she was 10. When awake enough to push the tangled mess of her strawberry blonde hair from her eyes, the light clicked several more times. Hanging upside down outside her second-story window was her father. MEETGRAVEYARD. Meet at graveyard. Her dad's teeth flashed brilliantly in a wide grin as the light reflected off the window. She smiled back, and he dropped. When she reached the window, he had vanished. Even the rope he had been hanging with was gone. Soft crunching of gravel on the side of the road continued the entire bike trip to the graveyard near her home. Full moonlight glittered down through the clear night. Alone she huddled near the entrance, looking for any traces of her father. A voice spoke from the darkness. "From the moment the beeping starts, you'll have 1 minute," said Vespa's father. He tried to disguise his voice in a menacing way, but she still heard the chuckle on the edge of escaping. "Make it to the other side before the beeping stops, and I'll answer a single question." A single question? Then the implication hit Vespa. She could ask any question, and her father would tell her the answer. He was giving her a chance to figure out what she wanted to know about his secret life. Her bike clattered to the ground when the beeping started. The first night she made it halfway before colliding with a headstone at knee height and tumbling forward. Her father laughed, emerging from a nearby shadow, and picked her up. The next morning her mother told her to be more careful getting out of bed when she saw the bloody scrape on Vespa's knee. She was never certain when the graveyard run would come, but occasionally he would give her another try. Now that she had beaten the trial, he was no longer around to ask the questions. But she was already certain what he would have answered. At least she was almost certain what he would have answered. Vespa thought about what her father taught her. Remember the small details. The employer, Mr. Wright, took his time when answering her questions, as if he did not know the answers off the top of his head. Her father claimed that they had been going to the conventions together. At least she thought he had said that. Maybe he wouldn't have wanted Vespa to search his past to discover what he was up to. But Vespa realized she didn't care what he would have wanted. Whatever it was had taken huge chunks of time away from her, and she needed to know whether it was worth that time. For the first time that day, thoughts of her father's death moved to the background of her mind, and instead she thought about finding the answers she wanted. Her bed creaked as she rolled to her side, and there was a quiet crunch of paper. A plain white envelope lay folded in her jacket pocket. Vespa's name was printed in thick black ink. There was no name in the return address section. She flipped the envelope over. The same handwriting as on the front was on the back, saying, "Congratulations on the graveyard run." Vespa tore at the envelope with the efficiency of a 5-year-old on Christmas morning. She yanked the letter inside free and gasped. Her father's handwriting covered the page. She hadn't expected seeing something like this would touch her so much, but tears fell down her cheek. "In truth, you are the best daughter a father could hope for. You have grown into a stunning woman of 15. Time and again you have shown determination, courage, and bright intelligence. These strengths are called for now. Your reading this means I have brought my work home with me, something I never hoped to do. This means there may still be trouble for the family, even though I am gone. Arrangements have been made to keep you safe, but I know how you think. You see the fine details. You will not be convinced the way your mother will be. I am asking you to trust me. The world is bigger than you think. Keep your eyes open, and above all, stay safe. If you sense any danger, any at all, report this to Wright Engineering. There is a business card inside the envelope with all the contact information. Don't hesitate. Remember to continue the best practices of locking the doors and watching out for suspicious strangers. I don't want to alarm you, only keep you safe. The love I feel for you will never change, even in death. Love, Dad." Vespa dropped the letter. The note had been written on the company stationery of Wright Engineering. Vespa sat in dazed wonder. What did he mean he brought his work home with him? A bear mauled him. Probably a bear. No one had seen anything, and there were no footprints in the muddy ground. Her mind kept circling back, and she again saw his lifeless body on the ground, covered in gore. She blinked the memory away. Focus on something useful. What did her dad need her to trust him on? she became aware of the heavy footsteps crashing down the hallway. Her door rattled with heavy pounding. "Great news! Great news!" cried Grace from outside the room. Vespa straightened and robotically opened the door. The large body that was her aunt pounced forward and enveloped Vespa. Several vertebrae of her spine popped. "You're going to be moving!" The aunt crunched Vespa to her again. "I was always telling your father to do so, and he finally made the intelligent decision. You're going to move to Lincoln City, Oregon, a block away from us." Vespa looked up into her aunt's eyes, aghast. Her aunt smiled wider and pulled her in again. "She's so excited she's speechless."